Hi, I'm Rachel. That's Missy behind me on the bed, and I'm going to go ahead and call this Wedding Weekend September 2020 reading update. I am far away from a Friday reads, further away than I was hoping or anticipating. And my most fun and interesting excuse for that is that yesterday was a wedding palooza for me, and that took some of my time. Well, one of them technically was my parents' anniversary, and I didn't really see them because they're in Baltimore and I'm in Silver Spring near DC. But I talked to them a little bit, and in the morning, my cousin Kyle got married. He lives in Kansas City, and because of coronavirus, me and my immediate family weren't able to travel there. My uncle and my mother apparently tried to broadcast on Facebook Live so that those of us who couldn't be there in person could see the ceremony, but I think two boomers trying to figure out Facebook just didn't work in this case. So unfortunately I wasn't able to see any of it live, but later on, well, I texted with my cousin, and my aunt sent some pictures and some videos, so that was a nice second best, I suppose. Then I had another wedding that I couldn't attend but was kind of part of. My friend Emily married her girlfriend in Austin, Texas, and since they are millennials, I think they figured out what they wanted to do with Facebook. They didn't broadcast the ceremony, they taped it, but afterwards they did a bit of a meet and greet reception type thing where they did a Facebook Live, and we could see them and chat with them, and they answered some questions just about the marriage ceremony and what they decided to do and plans for their future and all of that, just talking for half an hour, and that was a lot of fun. And I was actually in DC at that time. I had to return a prayer book to my synagogue and couldn't get home in time, so I sat down on a bench and I was able to just sort of watch the event out in the open, as it were, which was kind of nice to just at least be out of my house a little bit, but that does mean I had to take extra time to metro in and out. I was a little nervous about that as well. I've started using the metro again this week because I've gone back to work and I work on site, but otherwise I try not to use it at all, and it gets me nervous. And indeed, traveling on a Saturday on the metro, there seem to be more party people kind of around on the metro, kind of like in normal times how people use the metro for work on the weekdays and partying off hours. So I don't know, the whole thing with coronavirus is anxiety producing. But yes, I have returned to work, and it I think has, I spoke, I think, in my last Friday reads about how I was hoping a return to more normalcy would mean that I'd be more productive in my off hours, but let's just say it's a learning curve to get back to normal here. And I didn't want to sit down and make this video before I got a few things accomplished that took longer than I hoped, but now they're ready to go. I have my September 2020 literary newsletter linked down below. It contains snippets of a few of the books I read last month, as well as a book pick and a book meme and a TBR, and so check it down below. And the last book that I technically started in September and wanted to include in that newsletter was this one, which I finished much more recently than I would have hoped. It's A Mercy by Toni Morrison. I read this book in part for Toni Morrison 2020, which is a reading challenge put out by Hannah at Hannah's Books. We have a Voxer group going, and we've been trying to read through her novels throughout 2020. I'm nearing the end here because this was number 9 of 11. I think this one might be my favorite so far, which is weird because I think it's different than a lot of what she's done. It's her most historical novel, taking place in the 17th century, and most of her novels take place in the 20th century. And I think that the narrative was a little more streamlined than some of her other ones. It just, I guess by necessity, you don't run into as big of a cast of characters. I mean, it's not entirely true because Morrison goes into the backstories of several characters in this book, and we learn a lot about the historical societies that they come from people hailing from Europe, and then people hailing from indigenous people in what's now the United States, and also African people. And it comes back to this family of sorts. The protagonist is a teenage girl named Florence who was sold to a Dutch businessman, Jacob Vark, who died while trying to build a house he thought he deserved. And then his wife got sick, and Florence was sent off to find a blacksmith who had some miracle cures of a sort before, hoping he could help out the mistress of the house. And Florence herself has a bit of a crush or feelings for this blacksmith, and it goes deeper than that when they meet up. It goes into the meaning of slavery and the meaning of sort of if you put yourself in bondage or not, and also a lot of the trauma that Florence was dealing with because she was, in her mind, abandoned by her mother, although in the final chapter we get a more complex picture of what was happening there. I think those readers who read Beloved will find a lot of familiar themes and really enjoy this one, but it's obviously a very different time period and different concerns to a degree that Morrison brings up. I mean, a lot of her concerns, I think, in all of her books are very similar, talking about people sort of searching for love and acceptance in a world that isn't always accommodating to them. I mean, even the white people in here, to an extent, struggle with that. And she just goes into so much nuance and complexity of character in fleshing out all of these people. And I was so engrossed, but at the same time, I think it was difficult for me to read this book as quickly as I hoped to, because throughout these last few months of coronavirus, I've been struggling a bit and giving myself over too much to mindlessness and to turning my brain off. And it's been harder, I think, to turn it back on, even when I know, as I'm reading this, how compelling this book is. It's just taking me longer to engage with it, but I do want to get faster with these things, because September ended up being my worst reading month in terms of quantity. I guess that doesn't mean much, but I read 6 books overall, and I usually read 8, and there's so much to read, and it's always that roller coaster of just speed versus comfort, I guess, in terms of reading. I mean, there's just so much out there that I want to read. But maybe I needed to take my time with this. I certainly found it to be my favorite book of the month. So if you want to call it September or October. Of course, October, though, has only just begun, so we'll see what's in store. Well, the first thing kind of in store was this book, An Unspoken Name by A.K. Larkwood. This was a fantasy book that came out earlier this year that I put on hold in my library a few months ago, at least a few months ago, as a book that intrigued me, and I wanted to read it particularly because I want to read at least a couple of books in fantasy, because I love the genre, that were published in 2020 so that I can vote in the Goodreads Choice Awards, of course! And this book is about, it's epic fantasy, it's about deities and sort of religious rites, and I really love that sort of stuff. But because of my prolonged reading schedule, I didn't actually start reading this book until right before it was about to be snatched back as an ebook to the library. So I got through a couple chapters. I was compelled. It's a really quick pace to begin with, and in a way that's really good for you when you're trying to, I mean, I think it's a good time for me to be reading fantasy. I was hoping to read fantasy last month for my 7th and 8th book, but it's a good time for me now, I think, because I think a faster plot might be more propulsive if I want to read faster. But I didn't have enough time. I just read a few chapters, and it just sort of kind of went running out, and I'm intrigued. The backstory, I guess, is a little weak in a way, but that's what it feels like in a way, that, when the character changes before you even get to know a lot of the backstory. But I don't know, I'm just going to say that I'm not far enough into the book to make all of these judgments. And that being said, I decided, instead of putting myself back on the holds list, where I'd have to wait like 8 more weeks at least to get this book again, I went ahead and I ordered a copy. But I think it's going to take me a little while to get it, so I'll probably finish this book much later in the month. But stay tuned, I will record my thoughts then. And in the meantime, I'm moving on to my second fantasy book published this year, which in this case I own. This is The Poet King by Ilana C. Myer, the conclusion of her Harp and Ring sequence. I've read the other two books. I really love them. Again, this is epic fantasy. It has a very strong music base to it. It's not as into martial arts, which actually I think the last book I mentioned does get into like assassin stuff and whatever, which isn't hugely my cup of tea, but you know, we'll see what happens. But in this book, there's not a whole lot of that, although there is some conflict between neighboring countries. And in this book, we have in our main country a new king who is sitting on the throne, and then we're following some familiar characters who we kind of got to know in the other two books. Rihanna, who was the daughter of a merchant, and then she was married to a childhood sweetheart who in the last book went on quite a big adventure and seemed to abandon her, and she's sort of in a rough space with that right now, and also has stumbled upon perhaps a political plot. And then we have the former court poet of this land, Lynn Amaristoth, who is right now in hiding and I think is trying to get the world back on track. Magic seems to have been unleashed in this society, which is very much based on troubadour culture and singing culture, and it's just... It's hard in a way to explain these. I really hope sometime in the future I will read all three books back to back to back, and maybe just, you know, increase my love for the books, because I do love them. When I read them, you just get lost in the characters and also the language. Myer is such a wonderful lyrical writer in how she turns phrases together. It's like the books themselves are like songs in a way themselves. So it's really engrossing in that way. But it's kind of hard to explain, I guess, especially, I guess, maybe with the final book. But I really found these books to be intriguing and sort of within my wheelhouse of fantasy that deals more with politics in a way, and with magic, and with the feminine arts of, you know, music and what have you. So I will suggest giving it a go, but I will give my perhaps a more full review and more complete review once I finish this book, hopefully by next Friday Reads, which should hopefully be on Friday. But that about covers it for me now. I also hope to be back on this channel before Friday, because I want to finally give my thoughts about the BookTube Prize and the fiction round that I judged for the final round in August and September. And for those of you who don't know what the BookTube Prize is, it is an annual award where we whittle down lists of the best in fiction and nonfiction that have been published the year before. And Robert just last weekend posted the official winners for both the fiction and nonfiction for 2020. It was so exciting to see the culmination of this huge project that I've officially been working on this year as a judge for most of the rounds. I definitely think I want to give the nonfiction book winner a try, hopefully. So much to read! So much to read! But I will link that video down below. In the meantime, I still have some weekend left because it's a federal holiday tomorrow. This feels like a good way to re-enter the workforce after a 6-month furlough, to, you know, get some 4-day weeks, not weekends, weeks in a row. We have a few of them coming up in the coming months. Let's just not like get too hot and heavy into all this 5-day week stuff all the time. But so I hope everyone is doing okay in these times. There's some bad weather to the south of me. I think we're getting residual rain in the Maryland, D.C. area. And of course there's been all sorts of other health and political crises to date. So keeping everyone in my thoughts and hoping that at least your reading is keeping you grounded. So thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.